I'm pretty late to the party with Anatomy of a Fall, but this was the first opportunity that I had to watch. It just landed on Hulu in the US. So does this Academy Award-winning movie for Best Original Screenplay deserve to be on your watch list? A woman is suspected of murder after her husband's death, while their half-blind son faces a moral dilemma as the main witness. This is a French dramatic mystery that is presented in both French and English, and it's very balanced in both the drama and the mystery angles. We meet Sandra, the wife of the deceased man. Now, she's not the warmest of people, and we get to see some ever-growing complexities with her personality as the story progresses. Now, one day Daniel, the couple's son, comes home from walking his dog and finds his father face down in the snow and bleeding from the head. And this is where the mystery begins. Now, the only person at home, supposedly when the man meets his maker, was Sandra. So the question by police and prosecutors focuses on if Sandra killed him, if he did it to himself, or if it was simply an unfortunate accident during some home renovations. The story patiently examines the life and relationship that Sandra shared with her husband. All of their conversations and interactions become suspect, where, depending on how you interpret what she recounts, could point to her guilt, or her innocence. Now, for a good portion of the film, we get to hear back and forth interview-type conversations with Sandra and her lawyer as they go over her testimony, and then he coaches her on her answers. Now, these help to give a lot of clues and context to the relationship, but they still manage to maintain the intrigue and the mystique of the truth from us. Once the trial begins, the narrative becomes a slow examination of the relationship. And for this, slow means both patiently effective and boring. There were many times that sequences relied too heavily on pauses and contemplative expressions that just left us watching a character thinking. I mean, it was fine when we'd witness emotion being displayed as a character heard just some portion of testimony or some facts that were uncovered. But when that wasn't happening, the pace of the storytelling noticeably dragged. And this is a long movie. It's just over 2.5 hours, and I felt the time through a lot of it. And that doesn't mean that I wasn't engaged and invested in the story. I was. I just think if it hadn't been so enrapturing from an emotional and character study perspective, I would have tapped out. Now, the performance from Sandra Hüller, who plays the character of Sandra, she's excellent. There's a scene during the court trial that reminded me of Marriage Story with Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. There is just a crap ton of raw emotion being displayed that is devastating to hear, mainly because of how realistic it comes across. And if you've ever argued with a partner, this had twinges of realism. Also, because of how the segment is presented, it's even more captivating to witness. And we're given this in two different forms, with both being piercing. Now, because this is a mystery, the ending of the film could be a bit problematic for some. Usually in a story like this, where a person is suspected of doing something, we get a firm and solid resolution. It's not what we get here. We do get an answer, and it clearly resolves the story, but there's also a portion that leaves it kind of up to our own interpretation. So are you convinced one way or the other on what it is? Now, I think at the heart of it, the resolution, it doesn't actually matter as much as the emotional journey that we're taken on. Some spectacular conversations are replayed for us that can be tear-inducing. And the discussions, they're touching, heartfelt, sometimes dire and saddening. But through each of them, the sting of relatable truth, I think it's attached. And that's what ultimately makes this such a memorable and impactful watch. But this isn't without its flaws. I've already mentioned the runtime and how the pacing makes this drag, but there are also multiple times where the editing looks like cuts were accidentally left in, as we'll see a camera pan quickly across the courtroom to focus in on a different subject. Or maybe the camera will pan, then zoom, and zoom again. I mean, it's jarring, and it didn't match the rest of the presentation, leading me to believe that these weren't really supposed to be in the final cut. And there's also an alarming scene with the family dog that happens late in the film. Now, don't worry, the dog is fine, but I'm not sure how they captured the behaviors and the looks that they did. It was short, but a harrowing scene that can be very tough to watch. And I wasn't a fan of this brief story element, even though it was key to an essential portion of the narrative. And then, as an American watching this, especially with the courtroom scenes, it's certainly a different cultural experience. So much of the questioning and testimony that's presented felt way more like conjecture and speculation rather than fact-based. And then that's both countered and compounded by the lawyers. They get to provide exposition and narrative in the midst of their questions. Now, this doesn't have a huge impact on the viewing experience, but I did find it intriguing to witness a different legal system at work. I think some of it actually ended up creating more of a dramatic flair for the storytelling because I would get emotionally engaged and have visceral reactions to those proceedings rather than just sitting there passively taking in the interactions. Now, this movie was done extremely well. The performances are captivating with poignantly raw scenes that capture the frustration, sadness, despair, and complexities of the extreme deconstruction of an intimate relationship and all the personal nuances that hold meaning only within that coupling. With dramatic dialogue and heart-wrenching exchanges, the characters deliver indelible conversations that haunt after the film is concluded. And while the pacing creates an overly long narrative, the heart of the story is one worth investing the time in. Now, you may not want to watch it more than once, but rarely are characters captured with such devastating realism. There's no sex or nudity, a lot of profanity, and some violence. I give Anatomy of a Fall 4 out of 5 couches. So have you seen this one? What'd you think of it? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.